Good evening. I decided to be late just so that y'all know it was really me. If you want to know, have I missed you? Terribly. If you want to know, have I missed working every day? Not at all. If you wonder, am I dying to get back? No. So thank you to all the staff for doing such a good job that I'm thinking about staying till next year. And for all of those of you who have not called me, texted me, or emailed me, God bless you. And for those of you who have texted me, called me, asked me if I wanted to go to lunch or yada, yada, you still have time to prove that you love me and leave me the heck alone. Amen. What I've been doing my time, I'll explain later because the hour is already late, and I've got a 6:05 a.m. flight going to New York and then on to Chicago, where I continue to do research and interviews related to the publication that we're working on, trying desperately to get done all the things that I can only do while I'm on sabbatical. I have done 37 interviews, 20 in person, 17 over the phone. I got 25 more to do. The shortest interview has been 2 hours and 15 minutes, and the longest was 6 hours and 15 minutes. I cannot do that while I have deacon meetings and sermons to write and counseling to do and staff meetings. And so God has given me this time. I've been very busy. And so the relaxation has been, it's a different type of business. But God has given us something that we desperately want to do. And so I've enjoyed that time for this. Can you all join me in giving a great hand to the staff of this church for making it possible? The Minister Sam, Minister Hogan, Sister Sheila, Sister Victoria, Clarence, Mary, Angela, Marianne, everybody, Eugene, the deacons, everybody. I thank God for having a staff that can handle the business. I didn't need to come in for all the normal things, even the scholarship banquet. I knew they could handle it. There are some things you cannot pass off. And this extinction level event that happened in the life of our nation on yesterday that proved all the pollsters and everyone wrong, proved me wrong, everyone wrong, I think is something that causes a moment for, I've talked to 17 colleagues between the election returns on Tuesday night and this morning, and every single one of them without exception, particularly in the African American community and Hispanic community, if they did not already have scheduled a midweek service, they called a special one. It seemed at a moment that people are getting together just to process what has happened in the life of the nation, what it means and what it means next. So let me begin tonight by saying this, that in my opinion, Donald Trump did not win the 2016 U.S. presidential election in spite of the many outrageous, offensive, indecent, immoral, and at many points even unconscionable things that he said and did while on the campaign trail or even earlier in his life. He did not win in spite of those things. But rather, I contend tonight that he in fact won, at least in part, because of these very things that to people like you and I, who think like you and I, make him so demonstratively unqualified not only to be the president of these United States, but even to ascend to any position of great authority or high regard. Donald Trump unashamedly ran on a platform of racial demagoguery. He ascended to political prominence as the catalyst, the face and the voice of the birther movement, calling for the papers of the first African-American president, though his wife has not yet shown her papers. On a platform of xenophobia, He began his campaign at announcing, talking about Mexicans are rapists and murderers, even though the facts show that undocumented persons have a crime rate that is much lower than citizens, because the last thing they want to do is get in trouble with the law. They want to stay under the radar screen. A platform of anti-trade, a platform, he has demonstrated contempt for long-held U.S. alliances like NATO. He has disregard for international law, threatening waterboarding and torture, all of which violate the Geneva Convention. He was even openly misogynistic even before the release of the Access Hollywood video. And yet, sadly, these many and many more ungodly, divisive, and even dangerous features of the man actually made him more attractive and endeared him even more to the near 60 million plus Americans who cast a vote for him to be president of these United States, and millions more, some who loudly and some who more quietly cheered him on to victory. There is no escaping the heartbreaking, and indeed to me, the heart-aching reality that Donald Trump personifies what a majority of voting age Americans really think and really feel about this country and about other Americans. What many Americans would not say out loud, or felt that they could not say out loud, they embraced and affirmed in the private precincts of the voting booth. As James Russell Lowell once said, every man and woman can transmute their own private thought and opinion into history and destiny by placing it into the ballot box. So now we know what some Americans, and by some we're saying into the tens of millions, really think. Not what they say to you and I politely at the water cooler, or even when a pollster calls their house. The numbers don't lie. We know what they really think. Comedian D.L. Hughley, sometimes comedians say it best. He said the morning after the election, he said that, quote, Obama represents what America aspires to be at its best, but Donald Trump represents what America really is. And I must say tonight, and I must say it without hesitation or equivocation, that as a black man, a 55-year-old black man, looking 27, but 55-year-old, ain't nothing changed. As a black man, and as a black man with a 23-year-old daughter, soon to turn 24, I am almost inexpressibly angry at the fact that the nation that I love so dearly could select as its president a man who has been so openly and demonstratively racist all of his materially rich but morally and behaviorally pathetic life. He's been racist his whole life. When he and his daddy were sued in the 70s for not renting to African Americans, when his father told the property manager, we don't rent to niggas. When he paid for evidence to try and get the death penalty for the Central Park Five, who were wrongly accused of a rape and a murder, and after DNA proved that they were innocent, he didn't even offer an apology. And then the birther movement. He's been racist all of his pathetic life. Hear me well. I'm not angry at Donald Trump. Trump is trash. He's a fool. We've seen that and known that for decades. My anger at this moment is not at Trump. It's at the millions of Americans who think it's okay to follow the fool, to elevate the fool,
to empower the fool, and now to unleash this fool on all of the vulnerable groups who have been and will become the targets of his foolishness, now armed with the powers of the U.S. presidency. Now, to all of those who might think that my anger is somehow or another indicative of a character flaw, you Christian, you shouldn't be so mad. I will remind you of the words of the late, great James Baldwin, who said, and I quote, "To be black in America and to be to any degree self-conscious and sane is to be in a constant state of rage." If you don't pull from them African-American free protest tradition, then Reverend Dr. Harry Wright, former president of Bishop College, former pastor of the great Cornerstone Baptist Church of Brooklyn, New York, he said in a sermon on Jesus overturning the tables in the temple, he said that sometimes anger is the sane response to an insane situation. Sometimes anger is the sane response to an insane situation. Anybody's ever had a child come in at 3 o'clock in the morning, they're 15 years old, they were supposed to be in at 11, you was worried till you saw that they was all right, then you want to kill them, and you mad as hell because you love them, and if you ain't mad, you crazy yourself. Sometimes anger is the sane response to an insane situation, and the election of Donald Trump to be the 45th president of these United States of America is absolutely insane. A man so demonstratively unqualified and unsuited for the office, unsuited in terms of political experience, he has none. Ain't it interesting that the U.S. presidency is the only job in the world where inexperience qualifies you? People boast on, "I'm not a politician, so elect me to be one." Who would say, "I'm not an educator, make me principal"? "I've never cooked before, make me chef"? Or "I don't know how to use a gun, put me as a commander in charge of troops." Unsuitable in terms of, and unqualified in terms of political experience, in terms of knowledge of foreign and domestic policy. He didn't know what the nuclear triad was. Unsuitable, unqualified in terms of the understanding of the U.S. Constitution and the political process. Doesn't know how bills are formed, how they pass through Congress, how they go into conference, how they then go before the president's desk for signature, how it takes 2/3 of vote to override a presidential veto. Unsuitable and unqualified in terms of respect for protocols and decorum. He said he might not accept the results of an election. Unsuitable in terms of his appreciation for the rich diversity of the American people. Unsuitable in terms of his personal temperament. They took away his Twitter account the weekend before the election. The man that they couldn't trust with Twitter over the weekend, they're now entrusted with the powers of the presidency for 4 years? That is insane. Yes, I am angry tonight. I am sane enough to be angry. I am angry because I ain't crazy. And let me also say to those of you who may be all too comfortable with the election of Donald Trump, you done lost your mind. Somebody's crazy and it ain't me. And tonight there are a lot of people who are really frightened, and justifiably so. Hispanic Americans. Will Donald Trump now fulfill his promise to put together a deportation crew that will go door to door, as they did in the Japanese internment, and deport 20 million people or 12 million people who've been living in the shadows, who've been working and paying taxes, who've been a net gain to our economy, who do less crime than citizens, who even built Trump Towers? When I left the Warwick Hotel on Tuesday night, I went down there because Erin Jones, who was running for superintendent of public instruction in Washington State, would be the first African-American woman in that job, and her campaign manager was this brilliant young woman out of Howard University who happens to be Carissa Braxton. It takes a sister to elevate another sister. And so where her folks were gathering down at the hotel, Sheila and I went down there to support Carissa as well as Aaron. And when I left the hotel, I'd gone down into the bar area. Yeah, I said the bar area. I did not have communion, but I did have a crab cake. And Ron came down and sat when we were talking, and the man who was bussing the tables, filling the water glasses, a Mexican guy, and he was overhearing our conversation. I tend to talk loud so people can hear me. I'm always preaching. And when I left to go home, he followed me out and came behind me and said, "Man, yo, bro, this is effed up. It's effed up." And I turned around and said, "Say what?" He said, "I'm Mexican. I got 2 small kids. They were born here, but I wasn't. They gonna come get me? What am I gonna do? This is effed up." A lot of people concerned tonight. Principals have been calling in folks from city government. I got a call from Catherine Bush, Sarah's niece. Said that the mayor got a call from schools, "Can you send down a white man to the classroom to tell these Hispanic kids that Trump is not coming to now break up their families and send people home." They specifically needed a white man because they needed a white man to assure them that that white man ain't coming for their families. People are scared tonight. He promised his Duck Dynasty crowd that he's coming for them. People who want 30 million people who are finally got health care under the Affordable Health Care Act, otherwise known as Obamacare. Are they suddenly going to go back to becoming uninsured? Will insurance companies now be free to impose preconditions so that those who are HIV positive, those who have diabetes, or those who have some other precondition, a cancer or something, or just age as a precondition that you can't get coverage? He says within the first 100 days, with the help of a Republican-controlled Congress and Senate, that he is now going to repeal Obamacare. So 100 days, he gets installed on January 21st. So that means by Mother's Day, Obamacare could be repealed. So does that mean by Mother's Day of 2018, my 24-year-old daughter by then and my 22-year-old son will have to come off of Sheila and I our health care, and that means they will have to get it on their own at a rate that will be beyond what either of them can afford. But since they both have medical conditions that need constant proactive care, is Sheila and I going to have to go in our pocket to the tune of several thousands of dollars to get the same thing we have now, much more affordably, therefore blasting our own budget and changing our own lives? That's a real question. With the stroke of a pen, will he reverse the Cuban policy that allows travel to go back and forth, and commerce and families? Will he unravel the multilateral Iran nuclear deal? Will military commanders now begin receiving orders from the commander-in-chief to engage in waterboarding and other forms of torture, even though it violates the guidelines of the Geneva Convention and the tenets of international law? Will Muslim Americans now be banned coming in and out of the country? Will Syrian refugees, who already go through a very intense 24-month process of scrutiny, will they now be banned outright? Will they be stuck in the same thing as many Mexican families, whose families are split up? Roe v. versus Wade. He's promised these people, his Duck Dynasty crowd, that they're going after Roe v. versus Wade. They want to reverse it with the new Supreme Court picks that he might be able to make, and with the control of Congress and the House to reverse Roe v. versus Wade. And for those of you who just have not bothered to Wikipedia or Google Roe v. versus Wade, you might want to read the final arguments in 1973 when it was passed on what the Supreme Court ruling was about. And Roe v. versus Wade, they concluded that a woman's economic position and economic standing She cannot take control of it. She cannot determine when and under what circumstances she has a child, because a pregnancy can disrupt a woman's life, can disrupt her educational progress and plans, which then obstruct her economic rise. So the determination ultimately at the end of the day is women cannot rise economically if they can't take control of their reproductive rights. That not controlling when and if you have a baby can lead directly to poverty and the obstruction of educational empowerment, which can lead to educational rise. Will that be reversed? Is he now going to build a wall? Whether or not Mexico pays for it. Mexico said they're not going to pay for it. He's going to try and build it anyway? And then if not reimbursed, is he going to take money that we need for the rebuilding of our crumbling infrastructure? For building of roads and bridges, to build a wall, to keep a promise to an inflamed constituency that he now is beholding to? Isn't it ironic that on the day before Election Day was the 27-year anniversary, November the 7th, was the 27-year anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall. On November the 7th, the day before Donald Trump was elected as 45th President of the United States of America. It was the 27th anniversary of the day when Reagan had said, Mr. Gorbachev, tear this wall down, and 27 years ago on Tuesday, the wall came down, and now on the 27th anniversary of that day, we elected a man who wants to build a wall. Out of sync with the curvature of history. The NATO allies are worried. Is Donald Trump going to come out of NATO, which has been the shield against the Russians? Again, for those of you who have never Googled or Wikipedia NATO, NATO was put together after World War I and World War II. 85 million people lost their lives in World War II globally. 85 million. Can you wrap your mind around that? We lost 5,000 people in 10 years of fighting 2 wars in Iraq and in Afghanistan. 5,000, and that's a tragedy with every one. But World War II in 4 years, 85 million. 30 million in Europe alone. And the nations came together and said, we will work together to use diplomacy and non-military means to solve our geopolitical conflicts, lest we ever see this type of carnage again. And so this unique 75-year period of relative peace, there have been some conflicts, but not on a worldwide scale anything close. It is unique and unprecedented in world history that has been hallmarked with constant bloodshed. And the last ill-equipped man for the White House took it for granted. His name was George W. Bush, came from the same party. And now another ignoramus who knows nothing about these alliances and the history behind them and the historical forces that brought them into being to drag us out of the darkness of constant conflict. Will South Korea and Japan be encouraged to begin the development of their own nuclear arsenals? Will we soon see a new nuclear arms race and nuclear proliferation on a global scale? Will we now see the total destruction of the Voting Rights Act? Will we never see a new federal oversight map, which we're still waiting on, but instead see a new wave of unrestrained wave of voter suppression laws, emboldened and driven by those that believe if you can't beat them, cheat them? What about our political culture and the integrity of our elections going forward? Will candidates be expected to submit their tax returns anymore? Will the FBI now be allowed to manipulate the outcomes of future elections by announcing investigations or pretend investigations or oops, didn't really mean it? But the Consumer Protection Agency that was put together after the economic crash that stopped credit card companies from overcharging us with excessive fees, will that now be dismantled? Will the enforcement of environmental protections be stopped? Is Trump going to call, as he has promised, for a special prosecutor to investigate Hillary Clinton to try and put his political rival in prison, like they do in totalitarian nations. After all, his crowds, even on election night, were still chanting, "Lock her up." Somebody even chanted, "Assassinate the witch," spelled with a B. Is it going to dig up Michelle's vegetable garden? Remember, when Reagan took office, the first thing he did on election day was he took down Jimmy Carter's solar panels on the roof of the White House to symbolize things were going to change, and his unfettered, unfailing commitment to the fossil fuel industry, and to stall the movement going forward in renewable sources of energy. And 30 years later, we're still stuck with fossil fuels. Trump has promised in this first 100 days in office to do what Mitch McConnell, Newt Gingrich, Paul Ryan, John Boehner, and the rest of the pack of dogs could not do in 8 years of unprecedented and, in my opinion, treasonous levels of political obstruction. And that is to wipe away the Obama legacy as if he were never president at all. Now, that all sounds very stark, and it is. But let's put some of this into some sobering historic perspective. Firstly, the history of our country is very clear. It moves on pendulums, and every progressive movement forward has been followed, unfortunately, by white backlash. You have the Civil War and the Reconstruction period that was brought to a sudden halt in 1876. Hundreds of African Americans, former slaves, were elected into local state houses, 2 in the U.S. Senate. Hundreds of black townships were incorporated across the country. They were very profitable. In 1876, on a clandestine deal at the 11th hour with Rutherford B. Hayes, some historians call him Rutherford B. Hayes, that by executive order, his first active president, if they would put him in the White House, he reached across the aisle with white congressmen from the North and the South, banded them together, and he said by executive order he would withdraw federal troops from southern soil that had been there since the end of the war to keep the resentful, angry white mobs off of the backs of black folks so that we could breathe and get started in the building of a new life and have the Reconstruction. He would withdraw southern troops, federal troops from the southern soil, and leave us defenseless to the KKK, the White Citizens Council, the mobs, and they would use lynching and tyranny to set the clock back. And under the banner of Manifest Destiny, they were concerned not with the advancement of African Americans, but they were concerned with reuniting whites in the North and the South under the banner of Manifest Destiny, which was another language for white supremacy and the westward movement. So they pushed black folks back and they pushed Native Americans out, and then cynically they created the Buffalo Soldiers to send us to snitch out and at times to root out the Navajo and the Apache and all those who had been our refuge, because runaway slaves in the Deep South who could not run 1,000 miles to the north to freedom, they found refuge among the Native American people. That's why so many of us run around today. I got Native American in my family. Yes, we do, because the Native Americans took us in when we were running from Massa. Reconstruction came to an end with the election of Rutherford B. Hayes, Manifest Destiny, and the lights went out. It culminated in 1896 with Plessy versus Ferguson. Segregation became the law of the land. The lights went out into the modern civil rights movement. It started with this Montgomery bus boycott, went all the way through to Johnson's Great Society, passage of Civil Rights Act 1964, Voting Rights Act 1965, Fair Housing Act 1967, came to a sudden end with the election of Nixon, with his law and order platform, his Southern strategy, as all the Dixiecrats had flipped to the Republican Party, which became the party of white resentment. And then by 1972, you had Alan Bakke versus University of California, Berkeley, and the whole notion of reverse discrimination. When he couldn't get into the law school or in the medical school, saw some black folks got in and assumed that they got in because they were black and they weren't as academically competitive as he was, and this whole notion that now the sons of former slaves were picking on the sons of former slaveholders. You had the progressive era of Bill Clinton, the new type of Democrat that suddenly came to an end when Bush brought his so-called conservative or compassionate conservatism, but behind him was Rumsfeld and Cheney and Condoleezza and the neocons who wanted to export American-style democracy, take control of the oil wells, made a false link between Osama bin Laden and Saddam Hussein, sent us to war on false pretenses, drained the treasury, crippled and maimed a generation of young people, squandered American goodwill. You had the Barack Obama era of hope and change, which pulled us out of the recession caused by trickle-down economics on steroids, wars that were put on the national credit card, and regulations that were stripped away so the dogs got at the meat. He pulled us out of it. And now you have the backlash of birtherism led by Trump, the Tea Party, the language of taking our country back. From who? For who? To where? Culminating in the election of Donald Trump. We have seen these pendulums. It's one step forward, two steps forward, and one step back. That has been the history. 2 steps forward and then 1 step back. Right on time, you can sense the backlash. Because the racism, which was wrapped like a snake around the coil of the table onto which the framers signed that document saying that all men are created equal, endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights, among these which are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And most of them in the room were holding slaves, and they said it's going to come back to bite us, and it bites us over and over again because it's stained into the fabric of the nation. It's in the psyche and the soul of it permeates the thought of the nation. Trump's essential strategy was to play to the white fear and resentment without apology. What others winked and blinked in, he shouted with a bullhorn. And his implicit promise when he says, make America great again, is make white America great again. And everybody got it. Look who was in his crowd. People get it. Look who was drawn to it. Richard Hofstadter, the greatest political commentator of the 20th century in the minds of many, he explained during the Goldwater phenomenon, 1964, he said, right-wing radicalism happens when you have economic insecurity and status anxiety among your historically privileged group. That's what happened in Nazi Germany. That's what was happening in the early 60s. That's what's happening today. That's what happened in Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Ohio, where Hillary's blue wall fell. Economic insecurity is what's happening in the South, as Texas and Georgia are on the verge of flipping blue. Status anxiety. This election was the American Brexit. Nobody saw coming because they wanted to believe that Europe was more progressive than it actually was. Underneath it, it was seething because the people who historically had monopoly and privilege feel it threatened. They see their nations browning. They don't know what their status is going to be, and they long what for them were the good old days. And so this is the tantrum of many Americans. It was Clinton who was saying in the 1990s, talking about the angry white male. That anger has been brewing and bubbling as jobs have gone overseas, mainly because of changes in technology and trade. And in the blue-collar industrial North, the social values voters in the South But the good news is, and there is good news. The good news, my brothers and sisters, is that the election of Donald Trump can only be a temporary setback on the way yet still toward becoming a more perfect union. Can only be a temporary. Now, how can I say that it can only be a temporary? Because the macro demographics don't change. America, like Europe, is still rapidly becoming browner. The birth rates of minorities are up. The birth rates of the majority is down. The white share of the electorate in the 2016 presidential electorate was shrinking. It was 2% less in 2016 than it was in 2012. In other words, playing to white fears and resentments is only a short-term and ultimately doomed strategy. In a sense, it's like the light bulb that burns brightest right before it burns out. There is no long-term sustainability or survivability of the politics of white supremacy and xenophobia in the U.S. or Europe, because the demographics ultimately is the wave that comes to shore. So what's next? We have to stick to the script. We have to continue to register and educate young people, minorities, and whites in this country about the importance of not only registering to vote, but participating in elections, not only in presidential elections, but in midterm elections. 47% of registered eligible voters in the United States did not vote in the election. 47% of registered eligible voters did not vote. Did not. In Florida, with its 29 electoral college votes. In North Carolina, with its 19 electoral college votes. Between the two of them, there would have been an 87 electoral college vote turnaround, which would have put Hillary in the White House. The margin of victory was far less than the amount of eligible black and Hispanic voters who did not vote. The margin of Trump's victory was far less than the amount of eligible and registered black and Hispanic voters that did not vote. We gave it away. It's one thing for somebody to take something from you. We gave it away. 88% of blacks voted for Hillary. That was good. Down from 93 with Obama, but still great. Hispanics, 65%, down from 72 that voted for Obama. But the overall numbers of ballots cast was significantly down enough to create the margin of victory. The margin of victory for Trump. Now, let me say this to my young people. It's not just limited to young people, but that's where it really shows up, to my millennials. Y'all got to put on your big boy pants and your big girl pants. I read something from this brilliant young sister, actually comes here from Seattle. Oh, did I tell you her name was Carissa Braxton? Put on Facebook, she said, "Congratulations, millennials, we played ourselves." On the eve of the election, the night before the election, when the young man who was a Bernie or Byrne showed up at a Hillary rally and he talked about how he wasn't going to vote for Hillary, he wasn't voting for anybody, so by default, that was another vote for Trump. Let me tell you something, young people. You have to move from naive idealism to enlightened pragmatism. That's what politics is. Naive idealism, which is ultimately destructive because it profits nothing. To enlightened pragmatism. The difference between naive idealism and pragmatism is the same relationship I was telling Ron the other night, the relationship of law to justice. Emerson said that law is the shadow, the dark, distorted configuration that is cast from justice. If you shed light on this microphone, behind it will be a shadow. It will be the shadow of the microphone. It'll be a distortion of what the microphone looks like, but you can't have it without the microphone. Justice is what we seek. And law becomes our attempt to get at justice. Undergirding law should be an aim for justice. Undergirding our politics should be the high ideals. But, my brothers and sisters, politics is a pragmatic attempt at the art of the doable. Gandhi said, I'll take a half loaf now if it puts me in position for a whole loaf later. When I got two candidates, neither of which may have been my first choice, I got to ask myself, which is the lesser of evils? Which gets me closer to what I want? Which can I work with? They may not have been either been my first choice, but which can I live with? There's a big difference between Hillary and Trump. Hillary's not trying to run anybody out the country. Hillary's not trying to lock anybody up. Hillary doesn't have people come into her rallies with nooses and caricatures of the president. Sometimes you have to take the half loaf that positions you eventually down the road in God's own time and in the right time and in the zeitgeist, in the spirit of the times, for you to bring the whole loaf within reach. This Bernie or burn, all of it or none of it, my way or the highway, it is the tantrum of a prepubescent child. And if you're going to pull out your ID when you're going to the club that show you're an adult, then act like it when it comes time to deal with the political realities. And when you don't get what you want, stand up for what you need. Because you cost us an election. And now when you got to get off your mom and your daddy's health care and turn right around to them and ask them for the money to buy your health care on your own, where is your tantrum? Got to move from naive idealism to enlightened pragmatism. Pragmatism that is enlightened by our ideals, but knowing that we have to take a step forward. Take the best we can do. Second thing we got to do, and this has to happen at national and local level, there has to be a political price that the Republicans pay for their 8 years of obstruction to Obama. Now, hear me well, because this is going to mess with some of y'all who you're going to throw at me this turn the other cheek Jesus stuff. Slap yourself, but you ain't hitting either of my cheeks right now. Machiavelli said, he said, I'd rather you fear me than love me, because if you don't fear me, you won't even love me long. Can I ask you a question? Those of you my age and older, did you fear your parents or did you love them? When you came in the house later than you were supposed to, were you expecting to counter their love or fear? Huh? That fear. Fear the Lord. It's the beginning of knowledge. The unprecedented obstruction to Barack Obama cannot now be responded to by us turning around and singing Kumbaya with thieves and crooks. Because we will never have a political reset if the other side does not know in real terms everything that goes around will come around. And when we have a Democratic president, you will respect him, or your Republican president will have hell to pay. We'll take him to the gates of hell and we'll have him stare inside his entire term. They have the majority in the Senate, however. The threat of a filibuster requires 60 votes for cloture to end debate, to put it to a vote, even while it takes a simple majority to confirm a Supreme Court nominee. You can't get to a vote until you have cloture and closed debate. And you can't close debate if the threat of a filibuster requiring 60 votes. That's what they did to Obama. They shut everything down. Because they knew that if you shut everything down and don't get anything done, people will blame the party in charge and the president. That when Obama came in office, he had the Senate, he had the House, and he was the president. But because they didn't let anything go through, 2 years later, the frustrated public voted everybody out, and he was a hostage. Trump has everything. The Democrats need to come together and say nothing's moving. Nothing. Nothing. The only Supreme Court nominee we will let go up for a vote, we will filibuster till Jesus himself comes back. The only one we will let go up for a vote is the one Obama nominated, and you should have given a hearing on his term. You will respect him in absentia before we respect anything with an R in front of its name. You will learn. That's what my mama used to say before she whooped my behind. You will learn, and it made me better. He talking about draining the swamp. I'm talking about whooping somebody's behind. He will learn. This is politics, people. It ain't for the faint-hearted. Democracy is noisy and ugly. You can't stand the heat. Get out the kitchen. And it's time to turn up the heat on those who tried to boil this man for 8 years and let everybody starve in the process. They need to know we've got some arrows in our quiver, some bullets in our gun, and some muscle in our arm. If you don't respect yourself, ain't nobody else gonna give a hoot for you. I'd rather have you fear me than love me. Nothing moves. Everything gets filibustered. Everything. 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 Till you come clean. Everything. What goes around? What incentive would they ever have to respect anybody else if you don't put no pain on them? The same Jesus who said he who lives by the sword, dies by the sword, also said to his disciples later, said, take your sword now with you. Read the whole book. Don't give me this sloppy agape. Read the whole book. Read the whole book. So we've got to register people, educate folks. We have got to have presidential level election turnout for midterms so we can take back the House, take back the Senate. In 2 years, 8 seats in the Senate come up. So we can flip the Senate. The demographics say we can flip the Senate. And we got to stop this man from appointing anything for 2 years till he's got to try and get his appointments through a democratically controlled Senate. And we stopping everything from moving the same way they did. And folks are not going to use our Jesus-loving faith against us. I ain't got nothing to prove to you. You're a Christian, you shouldn't act that way. Man, you better go on. You better go on. The Holy Ghost tells me when to run to the Old Testament and when to go back to the New. You better go on. And I'm in an Old Testament mood right now because I'm dealing with an Old Testament crowd. Come on, somebody. If you can't say amen, just tap your neighbor and say, that Negro crazy. And heaven's full of crazy folk too. We've got to register to vote. We've got to shut things down. We've got to grow up and move from naive idealism to enlightened pragmatism and sustained political engagement. If you can protest, you can participate. Black lives don't matter if you don't vote. You just sound and fury, signifying nothing, as Shakespeare said. Then the final thing we have to do is keep our spirits up. We've got to take the long view. We've got to take the long view. What do I mean by the long view, Brother Roland? 7 years ago, I went to Oxford with Ray Bakke and, Joel Gregory with Proclaimer's Place. And we looked at all the great buildings there. We saw the big, huge Gothic facility where they filmed most of Harry Potter movies. We saw the wall that used to separate the Anglos and the Saxons. And a few years later, when Eugene and his late wife and Sarah and Sheila and I and others went to the Vatican, we saw buildings not only that were several hundreds of years old, some a millennium old, but buildings that took a couple and some several hundred years to build. And what struck me there, Dennis, is that means that whoever started the building project started the project with the absolute confidence that future generations would continue the work. That assumption had to be there. And then those in the middle who were not there at the beginning and would not live to see its end did not feel the exultant feeling of a new beginning, nor the equally exultant feeling of finally. But that not so exultant feeling of just stick-to-itism in the middle generations, who had to catch the vision, play their part, and then turn it over to the future. That's the long view of things. Ever since the 21st Africans were dropped off somewhere in the Carolinas as indentured servitude, soon to become chattel slaves for life, while constantly hearing patriotic songs and exalted words talking about all people created equal, endowed for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, but it just wasn't applied to them. Coming over a way that with tears was watered, treading a path through a blood of the slaughtered, when hope unborn was already dead and dying. And they just had to believe, must be a God somewhere, and someday. And then they had to have a long view of history, because there was a lot of setbacks. Freedom, Reconstruction, counter-Reconstruction, but they took the long view of history. Civil rights, breakthrough, but then here come Reagan and Bakke and reverse discrimination. And now Obama, and behind it the man who tried to delegitimize his even presence as president, said he wasn't even a citizen. And people wondering, I don't want to vote no more. I don't want to participate no more. We've been this way before. We've seen this, worse, and a whole lot more. Because we've always took the long view of history. We used to sing, he may not come when you want him. But he will step in right on time. And along the way, we've grabbed hold of words like Charles A. Tinley, who said, harder yet may be the fight. Right may seem to give way to might. Wickedness a while may reign, Satan's cause may seem to gain, but there is a God that rules above with powerful arm and heart of love. And if we're right, he'll fight our battles. We will be free. Someday. Ted Kennedy, who never lived to see all Americans have health care, and yet groaned out as the lion in the Senate. On the end of every one of his speeches for over 25 years, he said, for those whose cares have been our concern, the work goes on, the hope still lives, the cause endures, and the dream shall never die. And I come to tell you, my brothers and my sisters, we've gone from hope and change to somebody trying to take us back to the ground we've already covered. And I come to tell you, the work goes on, the hope still lives, the dream still is, and the dream shall never die. Why? Because deep in my heart, I still believe we shall overcome. And we don't mean black. We mean black folks and white folks and red folks and brown folks and gay folk and straight folk and American-born folk and foreign-born folk and blind folk and seeing folk and bald folk and folk with extensions and skinny folk and fat folk, good folk and bad folk, drunk folk and stoned out of their mind folk, homeless folk, all folk, because we're all God's children. And deep in my heart, go weary not in well-doing, for you shall reap if you faint not. Deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome someday, because God is still on the throne, and God alone still has the last word. Have I got one witness in here? Have I got one witness in here? Have I got one witness in here? Say yeah! Say yeah! Say yeah! Listen, this is what I want to do. I want everybody to take somebody by the hand. And I wish I had a musician in here who could color the mood. How many of you really believe tonight that God is at work in all this stuff? Or rather, God is still at work in spite of it, because God didn't do this. God didn't do this. God didn't do this. And I also want to be clear, this is not a black-white thing. Because it amazed me how many ignorant black folks was on Trump's team. And I appreciated all of my blonde-haired, blue-eyed brothers and sisters who was passionate about justice and inclusion as I am. This is not a black and white thing. This is a justice-injustice thing. This is an inclusion-exclusion thing. This is a we thing versus an us versus you people thing. That's what it is. How many of y'all really believe that in spite of what's going on, God is still at work? And that our finest hour is yet to come? Now, I want you to squeeze that person's hand next to you. Squeeze that person's hand to him and say, Pac said, keep your head up. If you don't know who Pac is, ask somebody under 50. Say, Pac said, keep your head up. God of our weary years and God of our silent tears, thou who hast brought us thus far along the way, thou who hast by thy might led us into the light, Lord, keep us forever in the path, we pray. God, we thank you for the grace to drag this nation out of the toxic brew of racism and misogyny and nativism and white supremacy, its original sins, and take the vaulted words and add flesh to those bones one generation at a time. Steps forward and steps backward, yes, but still marching on. You've sounded out a trumpet that shall never call retreat.
setbacks, but not breakdowns. And so, God, tonight, apportion us a grace one more time to gather ourselves, to gird up our loins, and to carry the fight again. Not us versus them, but right versus wrong. Not seeking to conquer them, but seeking to defeat evil and hate and ignorance and greed and indifference and bigotry, and to create sisterhood and brotherhood and familyhood with all who allow love to live in their hearts and their minds. Give us a grace, our Father, a grace to gird our loins, a grace to stand firm, to stand for love even if we have to inflict some pain, and to be righteously indignant, not toward the end of hurting for hurt's sake, but to bring accountability into a political order that in the end must itself be a shadow of the justice we seek. Give us, God, the intellectual stamina to be informed, to know, to seek the information, to seek the truth, to move into these battles with clear-eyed wisdom. We pray, dear Lord, that you would give us a forgiving heart so that we can recover from our disappointments and be in a right spirit to paint again a vision of a more perfect union and a brotherhood and a sisterhood of all of your children. We pray, dear Lord, a special prayer tonight for Hillary Rodham Clinton, an individual who's been unusually vilified, unusually persecuted, and categorically repudiated after a lifetime of service. In a hurt that we in this room will never know. But we know in you there's a grace to heal all our wounds. We believe with the songwriter, earth has no sorrow that heaven cannot cure. And now, oh God, that Donald Trump is going to be the 45th president of these United States of America, we pray, dear Lord, you would take hold of him. Tie his hands, Lord, if he reaches for the wrong thing. Use his hands if he's willing to be used for right. Muzzle him if he seeks to say the wrong thing. Speak through him if he's willing to speak right. Take hold of his mind, Lord. Put something in it. Grow him up to the job, or bind him in tight boundaries. And bring the people of this nation together around those spirits and those persons who will continue to speak into us a vision of real unity based in common respect, mutual and reciprocal justice and benefit, and equal access to the rights and the bounty of this land. We don't want to be a nation where some dine at the horn of plenty while others are only fed a hollow box of patriotism. let us all have a seat, not just at the welcome table, but at the horn of plenty. Have your way, God. Have your way. And give us the peace that passes all understanding. In Jesus' name. In Jesus' name. I do pray and give thanks. Amen. And since 7 is the perfect number, I want all y'all to hug 7 people right now and say, it's going to be all right.